Hi, my name is Michelle Nelson and I'm a professor of graphic plus interactive design at Youngstown State in the Department of Art. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about creative process and how you can define that, why it's important. One of the reasons why defining your creative process is important is because defining a creative process that you work with will help you get solutions faster and more effectively, and help you work through phases where you're just hitting a brick wall. Now, to do that, I have to talk a little bit about my creative process, and I know that you're probably looking at this and saying, well, that's a very fancy process. That's a cross section of a tree with tree rings. And for me, it's really appropriate, but I think everyone's visual might be different, and it should be different because we're talking about individuals, and none of us are exactly the same. I did this because I'm also an avid gardener. It's another area where I use my creativity. Some of the things that I do in my visual life as an educator and as a designer transfer directly into the things that I do in the garden. And so for me, it was a natural connection to make this a cross section of a tree, because your process grows and expands with each one of these steps. So my process is that I define, and because I'm a graphic designer, defining a project usually means sitting down with a client and discussing their needs and defining how I can help them. After I've done that initial meeting, then I move on to research and looking at their competitors, finding out what they look like, and trying to find a unique way to create interest for my client, to create interest in people looking at them more closely. I spend a lot of time doing keywords and writing. I often ask my clients to give me keywords. And after that phase, I move on to sketching and prototyping, depending on if it's packaging. I explore visually, and that's on and off the computer. That means that I might be taking photographs or drawing on my iPad, or a combination of both, or using Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign, which are key programs in design. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to build in a little bit of exploration in every client. And so I will save something as .1 and then save it as .2, and then I'll blow it up and change it completely. And then I'll do that 3 or 4 or 5 times, depending on the client and depending on the needs and depending on how many different directions I can come up with at any given time. Then I show my work to my client and get their feedback and move on to revisions after they've given me clear feedback. Now, this makes it seem like it's very cut and dry, just feedback, revisions, and then final work. But that's not the case. Sometimes that can be the case with one client. Other times the feedback revision loop goes on for quite a bit of time. So that's how I define my creative process. I thought it would be fun to show you how someone else defines their creative process. And this is someone else's. And you can see that it's complicated, and it's got lots of elements. One of the things that I would say about myself is that I'm very uncomplicated, and I want to get to the heart of something. Now, that's not to say that this is not, something that isn't interesting. It's just some of the things that it's just another way of defining the creative process for someone else. One of the things that I thought was interesting is how they broke things into different groups, and it's different from mine. And so I thought we would take a look at that, because then you'd have two different models. They had in bold, observe, reflect, and make. And you could actually break the creative process down in just those three components. And then they did kind of subcategories through conversation, experience, and values. You draw on metaphors, understanding and integrating research, criteria and goals, insights and concepts, search and envision through conversations with tools and materials, which is really, allows for a very one-on-one understanding. Your tools might be a chisel and a hammer, or your tools might be a paintbrush, or it could be a pencil or chalk. So that I liked that it left that very open. Evaluate, research, outlines and prototypes, thumbnails, and sketches. And to be honest, this is still a very design-oriented creative process defined, because under it all, I am a graphic designer. Attention and openness. You have to be willing to engage in those conversations with your clients or with outside people to see how they react to the work. Explore boundaries and issues and characters and stories. So you have to be willing and open to all levels of this for it to work. One of the things that I hear young designers say is, it's not my style, it's not my thing. And one of the things that I have learned over the past 30 years of creating is that you shouldn't have a thing, and you certainly should not have a style early. You should always be striving for something different. What defines you? Home, activities, experiences. And this is where we start defining you and your creative process and your artwork or design work. What are the points of interest about your creativity? For me, I love texture. I could look at texture all day. I'm fascinated by natural textures and man-made textures. And color. Color is something that I could invest in for a very, very long time. I learned very quickly that we all have predetermined color palettes that we are drawn to, but someone who's a visual artist really needs to question whether they're always making the right choices in terms of color. Typography for me is a point of interest. I love typography, and I could bore you for hours on the nuances. So what makes what are your interests about creativity, and what are your points of excitement? What do you think about most? Nature, games, family, entertainment, politics. This is just a short list that kind of gets you headed in the right direction. We started with nature. That's certainly something that I've talked about over and over as being a point of excitement for me, and an inspiration. Where do you want to take it? Great job, foreign lands, security, graduate school. One of the things that I feel very, very strongly about is you can have all the creative instincts that you possess, and still never know where you want to take it, where you want the creativity to take you. So define where you want to be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 30 years, and work toward that every day. What steps do you take when creating? Sketching, research, goals, stories, writing. It could be anything, because again, this is uniquely about you and your creative process. Take all of the things you've defined and visualize your process. Format the information in a way that makes sense for you. Where's my creativity taking me? Teaching, giving back to my community, gardening. This list is endless. I could probably bore you with 1,000 ideas. And my husband can tell you that I'm never without a new plan. And that's something I hope I have till my last breath. The list is endless because you can't use creativity up. The more you use your creativity, the more you have. Thank you for your time and good luck defining your creative process.